For some reason, the second half of the book of Acts has always been a little bit fuzzy to me in terms of keeping straight exactly what events take place in what order. And so I'm trying to keep those things straight and clear this time reading through, and hopefully you can remember after reading through the book of Acts all these amazing things that happen, because we're continue to see, even now in the last part of the book, just amazing things taking place as the gospel spreads over the face of the earth. So let's talk about what we see in Acts 18 to 22. Okay, let's start by talking about the spread of the gospel, particularly as Paul finishes his second journey in chapter 18 and begins his third journey in chapter 18 into chapter 19. And just as two examples, the cities of Corinth and Ephesus and the success, the great success that the gospel has in those places. These are cities that would have not only been very important in the ancient world, Corinth being in Greece and Ephesus being in Asia Minor, modern day Turkey. They were important for commerce, they were important for culture, they were important even for religion and for government as well in their various regions. And yet in these places, the gospel wins over many people with astounding results. Maybe particularly in chapter 19 in Ephesus, when you see great zeal of the disciples converted in Ephesus to give their whole hearts and all of their life to this gospel of Jesus Christ. Okay, speaking of Paul's journeys, one thing that's really interesting in this section of the book of Acts is how Paul begins this journey, and he's been traveling all through this section from chapter 13 on. But at this point, he takes a direct turn to go towards Jerusalem. And I guess that should be mimics Jesus' journey, but too lazy to exit out, change that, and start the recording over. But Paul made a decision, I think it's maybe first stated in chapter 19, that he's going to finish his journey and head to Jerusalem. And remember, Jesus made a decision in the Gospel of Luke, which is the first part of this work of Luke and Acts, to go to Jerusalem. And in both cases, they knew that there was danger and persecution, suffering, maybe even death waiting for them. Jesus knew, of course, that his death was awaiting him in Jerusalem, and yet he continued down that road. And even when people said, no, don't go, bad things are going to happen to you in Jerusalem, Jesus was steadfast in his purpose. You see a very similar story playing out in Acts, that Paul will be told over and over again, bad things are going to happen to you in Jerusalem. He's aware that the Jews in Jerusalem don't care for him, are looking for a way, much like his Savior, to trip him up and to have him arrested and maybe have violence done to him. But yet Paul is committed because he knows this is part of his purpose. And so Paul mimics Jesus in his steadfastness of purpose, specifically in going to Jerusalem. And we read about Paul ending up in Jerusalem in this week's reading, and it's really interesting to see the dynamic here. And we really learn a lot. I think about the conflict that was arising. We've already talked about it some in the first century between the Jewish Christians, or the Jews in general, and the gospel. The Jews in Jerusalem think that Paul is throwing out everything in what we would call the Old Testament, throwing out Moses, throwing out the old customs, and telling people not to pay any attention to those things. And Paul says just the opposite, and he actually goes through the process of performing one of the rituals in the temple to show that he is not opposed to those things, yet he is teaching that they find their fulfillment in Jesus, and that you shouldn't bind those things on the Gentiles that are being converted to Christ. But the Jews don't get that. They start a riot. They come after Paul. He has to be actually arrested in order to be kept safe. And before he's taken by the Roman guards, he gets one opportunity to speak in chapter 22. He retells his story. He tries to connect and say, I am one of you, and I've come to know that Jesus is the Messiah. He's the King. And now I'm taking the message to Jews and to Gentiles. And it's at that point that the crowd can't take it, and the uproar starts again, and Paul has to be taken in. But we see, again, the conflict because the gospel has been taken to Gentiles, But that message of this Messiah for all people is something that the Jews have a very hard time accepting, and the reaction to Paul demonstrates that. But again, Paul remains faithful, and now we'll see in his imprisonment stays faithful to whatever end it takes him. But that's what we see in Acts 18 to 22, and so check back next week for our last full week of reading the book of Acts, and hope that it's beneficial for you. Thanks a lot.